Det Jorg, og dette mannen som både landskapsarkitekt og byplanlegger. Han har I tillegg sitt eget Paradox City, som veldig spennende. Og han har forsket på dette med havnivå og hvordan byer kan tilpasse seg et stadig økende havnivå. Vi snakker om deltabyene som Venezia, New Orleans og Hamburg. Og I det siste så har han også utforsket dette med mikrobiell økologi, hvor han ser litt nærmere på hvordan mikrober kan spille en rolle I grønne infrastrukturprosjekter. Ta en varm applaus til Jorg Sieweke.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I will speak in English, sorry. I will be speaking about elements in the environment and the landscape which are invisible, but which effect may be quite significant. So if we, for example, remind ourselves of the largest oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon event, it was largely cleaned up by a bacterium which pre-exists in this water and then sort of steps up to the occasion and has helped to degrade and consume about 50% of the oil in the water column. And so they have their own mechanism to wrap the oil droplet in what's called a microfilm, a biofilm, which is creating their own habitat to then degrade with enzymes the oil. Another large-scale phenomenon in the same Gulf of Mexico is the annual dead zone, also called hypoxia. It's the absence of oxygen in the water column, which is caused by a chain reaction of excess nutrient coming down the Mississippi watershed and then leading to algae growth. And the then dying and decaying algae are consumed by another bacteria, which is then consuming all the oxygen in the water. So these are two events or mechanisms that can be pinned down to single bacteria species, which are invisible but have an enormous impact. And depending on perspective or context, this impact can be very useful, or in this later case, also problematic. Now, invisible landscape, of course, is an oxymoron, and it's also part of the explanation why landscape architects have not really looked at microbiology. Here's one of very few projects examples of Professor Gustav Lange, who is at least implicitly addressing microbial life and inducing it in this fountain sculpture, which is both designed to erode and degrade in the mineral structure, but also promotes growth of this biofilm again and all kinds of microbial life. So another reason or maybe explanation why landscape architecture has not turned to microbial ecology is that one trajectory, one history of our discipline lives or is born in the idea of urban hygiene. So it's actually everything to do against bacteria based on germ theory, which showed in the 19th century the connection between bacteria and diseases. So this is also a root of our own discipline to provide for urban hygiene. And in a way, we have then overdone it as a society, and we're throwing out the baby with the bath here, and arrive at a moment of over-sanitation where the absence of bacteria and microbes are causing new diseases. And asthma and allergies or even cancer are actually an outcome of the lack of certain bacteria in the environment. So this is maybe also important as a discipline to reflect that we are concerned with all these styles and trends and that are shown here in the middle as a historic process of modernization and all the topics that we were concerned with. But sort of the brackets of it in this larger modernization is what I just mentioned, how the tradition of urban hygiene and its late effects today introduced in early modern times and its outcomes in late modern times, and how we need to address and respect that. This diagram by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation also shows on the left butterfly portion here how the decomposition and microbial digestion is really elemental for any ecological system to degrade any matter and also make the nutrients available again. So it's this perfect recycling scheme that we take for granted. But here it's introduced as a model for technical processes that we are now calling circular economy as a target. So the biological cycling and the role of microbial digestion is the model to operate as a society for achieving the goals of circular economy. A couple definitions. Microbe is a single organism. Microbiota is the group. A microbiome is the entire collection. And then besides bacteria and we have this group of cryptogams, which translates to non-flowering plants or species that don't have visible flowers, and this then is concerned with fern, moss, algae, or fungus. There is mention of a holobiont, which is a kind of a system or a unit, an ecological unit, which is defined by symbiosis, by mutual beneficial relationships, where microorganisms have a central role. And then if you talk to microbiologists, they come out with very simple and bold statements suggesting that everything is everywhere. So you don't need to kind of bring and carry particular bacteria into the environment. They all are already present. They are omnipresent, and they are oftentimes dormant to then come to life, as in the example of the oil spill. We can make a distinction between the human microbiome and the environmental microbiome around us. And so our bodies are populated by this enormous number of microbial life, and this is situated in an outer layer of soil, water, plants, and animals, which have their own microbiome. And the least number of them are actually causing illnesses. So there's more recent research in human health and medicine linking the bacteria in the gut and the digestive system to brain activity, which is a paradigmatic change in human medicine. It has been poorly understood until very recent, when also highly specialized parts of medicine started to cooperate and get this more holistic perspective. Any individual microbiome of a human is singular. It's like a fingerprint. And so with this new insights, there are also potential cures and therapy to treat brain diseases through interventions of or promotion of the gut bacteria. That is a very recent ongoing work and research in the human health field. Now, for us as landscape architects, plants have their own microbiome. They live in different areas of the plant, on the outside of the leaves, in the tissue, and also maybe best known in the rhizosphere and in the roots, where they, for example, can contribute to nitrogen fixation. It is, for us, one of the challenges and potential is to now link the human microbiome with the benefits of exchange with the environmental microbiome, which is about immunoregulation for improving human health. And so if you have the experience that walking through the forest is feeling healthy, there's now growing scientific evidence that within this exchange it actually is evidently healthy. Another important layer is the role of fungal networks, which create the mycorrhizosphere. It's this tightly woven tissue of barely visible hyphae connected to the roots, which enormously help the promotion of water intake and nutrients for any plant. In forestry, there has been this paradigmatic research on the what's called the wood wide web, and the survey of a Douglas fir forest, 30 by 30 meter patch, and doing a couple hundred kind of samples into the soil, and with also scientific evidence proving and showing how the fungal networks are connecting these trees and how this fungal network is helping the trees, also about deficiencies with sugar or water intake. So the fungi is actually helping as an infrastructure to funnel water and photosynthesis products from tree to tree, which is has a very large impact on forestry. But typically we are concerned with urban forestry. So how does this insight and this kind of knowledge translate into urban sites? And how can we, as landscape architects, promote a richer and better environmental microbiome in the urban environment? Last semester, I collaborated with a younger postdoc, Jake Robinson, who is one of the very few people who is already working at this interface of green infrastructure and microbiology, did his PhD on this, and he was helping us in studio to understand how we can interact here. This is a drawing showing the complications of any urban habitats, especially the roots, how it's obviously constrained and compromised. And this is an example coming out of an earlier studio I was teaching in the City Studio Oslo, looking at spontaneous vegetation in Oslo, and with the beginning of the urban tree program in Oslo, and pointing at the fact that the tradition and the convention of delivering a tree, if we are talking about 100,000 new trees for Oslo, and how far there's this convention of raising this tree in a nursery outside the city and then bringing it, as a kind of sterile and copied clone from a nursery into this urban environment where it's really having a difficult time. And so we were interested to explore how far spontaneous and emergent vegetation in the city is actually there for a reason and may be ecologically superior to anything planted from a nursery. And this, of course, has a tradition here in the Ruhr, Iber-Emscher Park in Western Germany, where all these post-industrial landscapes were essentially developed out of the existing context of this ruderal and spontaneous vegetation. There's been very little has been planted. It has all been sort of calibrated and curated as emergent vegetation, and also contributing to what's called natural attenuation, the cleanup of the soil of these sites. There's another group of projects in Berlin, a number of prominent and popular parks on former railways, which also focus on the spontaneous vegetation and in a way celebrates this as a growth on sites which have been sprayed down with herbicides for a long time and are now creating their own ecosystem which are about to be protected. And Peter Del Tridici here, restoration ecologist, argues that this is the actual, most adapted and most viable set of species that are, again, here for a reason. So in the studio, teaching at NMBU and in the International Landscape Architecture program, we make an effort to turn to the science, which is rapidly developing and really exciting, and to understand and reflect on some of these principles that we can take from natural science readings and understand how these microscopic mechanism of a root tip secreting, sending out a secret to message to the microorganisms in the soil and create again the symbiotic relationship are stunning and really interesting and relevant to think about regarding soil health, soil composition, and again ecosystem function. A similar mechanism is how microbes create their own habitat in this, what I mentioned before, biofilm formation. So this sort of slimy, moldy patterns that you can observe on rocks and waterways, which many people may find as disgusting, are actually super valuable and productive. And this is another moment where we need to kind of shift our attention a bit. We are then working with a couple of experiments. This is from the current semester, where also about 50 years ago, Ehrenfried Pfeiffer created what's called the paper chromatography. And it's a matter of using soil samples in a dilution in water with a bit of acid, and with capillary action letting this dilution pull into this paper and creating this portrait of a soil which can then be interpreted in scientific ways. And what's interesting is, again, that more recent scientific papers are looking at this 50-year-old experiment, and they do validate it, and with recent findings, at least to supplement and have an extra layer of evidence to much more sophisticated and expensive laboratory equipment today. So this is the work of Florian Opitz, who is a master thesis student right now, and he is exploring a number of urban parks, taking samples and running these experiments. And in another scale of experiment, we have, thanks to the Landscape Lab at NMBU, we have inherited these boxes already seeded and planted with rain garden vegetation and soil, which have been used by another PhD student for hydrological research. And we now use them to contaminate them with, whatever we expect in urban runoff from streets, oil and tire wear, and then study the reaction and response of microbial life within these mesocosm. Okay, so this was a quick kind of ride through many layers of microbial life, and I would like to end here with a bit of distance and respect, and again remind us where we come from here with Ernst Haeckel's Tree of Life, where it's suggested that men are the most advanced and top creature of all. And with the more recent and accurate scientific classification of life forms, we find ourselves at this kind of thin end towards, pointing downwards, and all the microbes and microorganisms have been going through multiple mass extinction events, and we are about to face the first one, which we created for ourselves. So let's see, who sticks around. Thank you.